Okay. Sorry, let's get to where we are here. I guess there's not really any reminders through Moodle. I have everything already open. So remember, the exam 2 review sheet is there. You guys should have handed in that completed exam 2 review sheet already. And then also that chapter 8 case study that we're going to go over was due already as well. I mean, in terms of, don't worry about anything else except that you're going to study for your exam for Wednesday, right? And log in for the exam. I will make sure I have these journal articles. I'll look at them and grade them by class on Monday, so then we can kind of revisit that and come back to the project, okay? But for now, we're just gonna worry about the exam. All right, so like I said, I think I pretty much already have everything open, so let's pull up the case study. So I assigned you guys this case study on Grace Vincent, so let's take a look at what we wrote. I also have the answers, you know, like the textbook answers. I'll sort of toggle between and just pull those up. And then obviously it'll be on the recording too, so that you can check back if you needed to. But we're going to discuss it. I want to know what you guys had, you know, written down for these questions. Okay. So let's take a look. So take a look at this, guys, and then we'll talk about kind of questions 1 and 2 at the same time, because you may have kind of had kind of the same thing for sort of both of them. So again, we're answering these questions based on this limited amount of information that was given. So, you know, tell me what you guys, somebody sort of unmute and tell me what you wrote for question 1/2, because again, I think kind of, you know, question 2 is making you focus on the symptom of dizziness and mild shortness of breath. But I think question 1, you kind of might have addressed that in question 1. So let's just kind of take both of these questions together. So who wants to volunteer their, let me get out of here so I'm going to stop the share so that I can see everyone better. So why don't you guys, again, I'm going to ask you about questions 1 and 2. So you should have your assignment up probably and let me know what you guys wrote for this. Okay. So key things are that she's 54, her age, right? And just some of the symptoms: fatigue, right? 2 weeks of fatigue, mild shortness of breath, and dizziness with less than normal activity, okay? That's pretty much what you're working with in terms of information. Okay, so like I said, I'm gonna stop my share, that way I can see all you guys. Okay, so why doesn't somebody share what they wrote for this question or questions?
I said that it could be, I think this was more towards like the second question, but like her not taking any medications or herbal supplements, she might have like a deficiency in, like, if she's not taking proper vitamins or something like that, and she could be anxious having to go back to a doctor since she hasn't been in.
Okay. So the anxiousness was sort of related to what symptom?
Like I think maybe I put it like of the dizziness and the shortness of breath. Okay.
Okay. Would you necessarily think you see shortness of breath with anxiety? Again, this is over 2 weeks, right? Remember, these are kind of, you know, not something that's sort of acute and kind of after, you know. So, I mean, I guess you could kind of make the argument maybe, and I think that's a fine initial sort of assessment, right? Somebody else. So one thing I want to say, guys, is make sure, as long as you, just like Joya did, sort of justified why you put what you wrote, that's fine, right? Especially given this limited information. All right, so somebody else, tell me what you wrote for this one.
So I focused on,
go ahead, Christina first, go ahead.
Okay, I focused on the fact that she hasn't been to a doctor in for a health screening in 22 years.
Okay.
So she wasn't able to get like a traditional, like a CBC to detect for her electrolyte levels. So the fact that she wasn't able to get this blood test, like maybe this fluid and electrolyte imbalance that she's having like could have occurred like over years, and like these symptoms are getting worse because she waited a long time to get the routine blood test.
Okay. Okay. All right. Who else was that Elise that wanted to say something before? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I wrote that maybe she's anemic because of the way she has been. I think it said fatigue or very tired. So I thought maybe she might be anemic, and then I also put that maybe she's having some kind of heart issues because of the I think I put that because of the dizziness and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. I think these are all legitimate answers because we're given limited information. All right. Anyone else want to add? No?
I said she could just have like an underlying issue that like isn't like that wasn't found out yet. So I put like she can have like a heart or like breathing issue that she wasn't aware of because she is adopted. So like I just put like that her family history is unknown. So she could have an underlying issue that she's not aware of, and that like she would have to run tests.
Okay. All right. So some sort of respiratory or cardiac condition that could be kind of, okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's legitimate. All right. Anyone else want to add for these first two questions? All right. So let me go back and share my screen again, and let's look at the next sort of set of information. And then the next two questions. So first here, right? So now we got some more detailed information. Now, and again, we don't need to necessarily know every single detail sometimes in some of these case studies. But anyway, go ahead. All right, so let's look at what the questions are. Well, okay, so a couple things, I guess before we look at those questions, somebody tell me kind of what are some things that you sort of would pull out of this that you think are important to note, give this information here.
The rapid weight gain over the 2 weeks.
Okay, good, the rapid weight gain over the 2 weeks. All right, what else?
High BP.
Okay, yep, what else?
I said like a poor oxygen saturation.
Okay, good, a poor oxygen saturation, good. Anything else that you kind of pulled out?
Irregular respirations.
Okay, good, irregular respirations.
I pulled out atrial fibrillation. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, AFib, right? So yeah, atrial fibrillation. It is hard to say that word. All right, good. I think we kind of got most here. What's dyspnea?
Shortness of breath.
Okay, and mostly she's obviously noticing that on exertion, right? Okay. It says here too, she does not feel better with supplemental oxygen. Does that kind of give you guys any clue about anything here?
It shows that she might have a heart issue instead of a lung issue.
Yeah, it indicates that perhaps the issue is stemming from, a cardiac issue. Okay, all right, good. So now let's look at what, there's a little bit more information there, and then we'll talk about question number 3 first, okay? All right, so question number 3 is, what is the likely cause of Ms. Vincent's pedal edema? So first, what is pedal edema? Maybe you had to look it up. What is it?
Peripheral.
Not necessarily just peripheral, but, well, it is peripheral, but specifically where?
Swelling in the lower extremities?
Yeah, lower extremities, okay? So it's just another name for lower extremity edema. And a lot of times, obviously, you're gonna see edema in the lower extremities just because of gravity, right? So if we're talking about general edema, it's mostly, it more often occurs there. Obviously, we can have pulmonary edema, which is probably part of this. She has this too, but in terms of what was noticeable as a sign is that pedal edema means lower extremity edema. Okay, so what do you think the likely cause of her pedal edema is?
I said that it could be the excessive weight gain, and the lack of, because I think in the first slide it said that she wasn't as active as she usually is, which could cause swelling.
Okay, again, let's specifically think about now, and again, I mean, I guess there's still kind of, we don't know exactly, but let's think about chapter 8, right, and the concepts there. And in terms of edema, right, why would somebody have edema? What are some reasons that edema occurs?
Because of poor circulation
Okay.
in her lower extremities.
Okay, so again, we're kind of, because and a lot of people in my last class too kind of went the sort of obesity kind of route, right, in the rapid weight gain, which yes, if we're talking about like kind of indirect cause, right, we can kind of be then getting to edema somehow, but let's think more direct, I guess, here, okay? And again, is that a wrong answer? No, but let's kind of try to, let's get this focused on kind of our concepts for chapter 8. So, go ahead, what else you put?
I put that it could be a water sodium imbalance, and that I related that again to the lack of possibly vitamins that she's taking.
Okay, all right, okay, good. So now you're getting on right. All right, there's probably some sort of fluid imbalance or there's something going on with that regulation there. Okay, but now again, we've got to think about the shortness of breath, right? Where does that now sort of come in, and how does that sort of related to the edema maybe? Sydney? Are you raising your hand?
Yeah, for relating it a little also back to number 2, dyspnea and edema have relations to dizziness and heart failure. And also, like Joyce said, I said the complications of fluid and electrolyte balance led to abnormal perfusion, which contributed to edema.
Okay, all right, good. All right. I think we're all kind of, we're on the right track, right? I think these are all legitimate answers. Anyone else want to add to number 3? All right, number 4 is what factors are most likely contributing to the development of hypertension? So what factors did you guys kind of add in here for the high blood pressure?
It's like due to possibility of perfusion, if like her veins may be swelled up, causing problems like constrict.
Okay. What else?
I said that like when you have a buildup of fluid, your heart's trying to circulate that fluid, so it's gonna pump more. So when the heart's pumping more, it's gonna cause a higher blood pressure.
Correct. And just in general, right? If you have excess fluid, remember I talked about this in the recorded lecture, or increased volume, right? Just fluid volume in general, then usually it leads to increased blood pressure just because there's more blood circulating throughout the blood vessels, right? And so that's the increased blood pressure. So if we're kind of putting together her edema, right? The shortness of breath, she had AFib, right? There's a cardiac issue going on. That high blood pressure is most likely related to some cardiac issue and this increase in fluid, right? Or this increased blood volume. Okay. So somebody, I think Joya might have mentioned this rapid weight gain. Okay. So what does that rapid weight gain within the last 2 weeks tell you?
It could be possible water weight.
Yes, exactly. It's not due to her like, eating too much or something like that. It's water weight, right? So that rapid weight gain is something to look out for. It indicates, that it's water retention, and likely maybe even her I think she was 215 pounds 2 weeks ago. A lot of that may be fluid, right? And so that rapid weight gain within 2 weeks is really indicative of there's some major issues with excess fluid going on. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. So, and so again, she has shortness of breath, right? So what does that indicate to you guys? What's going on there? So we said she has atrial fibrillation, right? So her heart is not working the way it should be. And so maybe you might suspect heart failure, right? So how does that then lead to the shortness of breath? What's the heart failure causing that then is leading to the shortness of breath?
It's not circulating the blood, right? So it can't circulate the oxygen or CO2 exchange or something like that. I don't remember like the exact like biological like reasoning, but I know like it causes like buildup of fluid in the pulmonary.
Right. And you can just think of that buildup of fluid, right? So that's what we're talking about, pulmonary edema, right? So pulmonary edema in general, is something that you see with heart failure, right? Why? Right. The heart's not able to circulate the blood the way it should. So blood pools up in those blood vessels, right? Blood doesn't, it's not blood that's leaking out into the lungs or anything like that, but because there's so much blood sort of backed up in that pulmonary circulation and in the blood vessels, what starts to happen? Fluid leaks out, right? And if you have fluid in the lungs, this pulmonary edema, obviously the lungs are not going to be able to function properly, right? And so that's where the shortness of breath is coming from. All right, so let me just see what else we got here. There's 2 more questions, I believe. I think we kind of touched on it, but let's see what's next. All right, let me share my screen again so we can just read the next bit of information. All right, guys, so take a look at what's presented here. Right, so, basically she's, been diagnosed with heart failure, like we were just talking about. There's some physical findings, right? The crackles in the lungs. This displaced point of maximal impulse is also another way to diagnose heart failure. Peripheral edema, right? In terms of the weight gain, right? We already talked about that. That also fits in with that diagnosis as well. So let's look at the next set of questions, okay? Oops, I can just do this. Read a little more information and then we'll talk about question number 5. All right, so what'd you guys write for number 5? I think we kind of talked about this already, but why don't you guys tell me, or somebody tell me what they put down for number 5. What do you guys write down for number 5? I mean, I think we, like I said, I think we kind of already discussed this, I guess.
Well, like we said before, when the blood gets backed up, it causes fluid to leak out of the vessels. And that leaks into the air sacs in the lungs, and it causes the breathing to be labored and causes crackling lung sounds.
Okay, good. So yeah, so we talked about it a little bit. We didn't necessarily talk about the crackles, right? But that's something that you would hear, right? And then again, the reason why the heart failure relates back is because of that pulmonary edema that it's causing. Okay. All right, good. Now, what about number 6 here? So it says, discuss the rationale for the use of furosemide and warfarin, okay, for the management of heart failure. Now, you may have had to look it up, right, which is fine. So the management of her heart failure, AFib, and hypertension, okay? So what's furosemide?
A diuretic.
Okay, a diuretic. All right, good. So what do we mean when we say something is a diuretic?
So for this one, I said she has an excess of sodium in fluids and she has heart problems. So the diuretic would promote excretion of that sodium in fluid.
Good, good. One other thing I wanted to point out here is to understand that there are many different types of diuretics. So all diuretics will obviously cause excretion of fluid, like you said, but they work through different mechanisms. And in the recorded lecture, I think, or in the lecture, you see there's kind of a couple different parts where we talk about different types of diuretics. So I just wanted to make you guys aware that, a diuretic in general is going to cause, more urine output, right? Or excretion of fluid, but sometimes the mechanism that it uses is different, okay? And so sometimes depending on, you know, what's going on, one might be prescribed versus another, or what other meds they're on, right? Some of that kind of has to do with it. So, so anyway, I just want to make sure we understand what a diuretic is in general. Nobody needs to memorize different types of diuretics or anything. Just be aware that they do work through different mechanisms, right? And so that's why, and so sometimes one patient might need to be on this type of diuretic, another one might need to be on this type of diuretic. And again, a lot of times it has to do with what other meds they're on as well, okay? All right, what about the warfarin? What's that? What about the warfarin? What type of drug is that in general? What do you call them?
Blood thinner.
Yeah, blood thinner is the common name. So with atrial fibrillation, if I can say it, patients have the tendency to form clots, right? And so that's why the blood thinner is given. Now, for the increased blood pressure, right, the diuretic should probably help with that, right? Because we said that she has this increased fluid retention, increase in blood volume, and so the diuretic and also the blood thinner will help with the increase in blood pressure, right? I think did we hit on everything? Did we miss anything? Let's see. I don't think so. Anyone have questions about that case study or any of the kind of things that it brought up, I guess? Oh, I know. I have a question. What is AFib? What do we mean by atrial fibrillation, and why is it dangerous? Somebody who hasn't answered. What, Winterland? I can't hear you though. There you go. What's AFib?
So it's when the valves, I forgot the name of the valve, but the valve separating the atria and the ventricles is like not permanently, but it's like open. So the blood doesn't like get separated. It just kind of like just flows right straight into the ventricle. And
yeah, and so the reason why is because those atria are never contracting and relaxing fully like they should, right? They're in this fibrillation kind of pattern. And so, yeah, you're right. The heart can't effectively move the blood from the atria into the ventricles, right? And then therefore pump it out. All right, good. So I just want to make sure we knew what that was. So it's important that they try to get her back into a normal heart rhythm, right? So that her heart starts, you know, working more efficiently, okay? But obviously this is beginning stages of heart failure, and so likely her symptoms will start to get worse, right? But I think in the case study, right, it says to kind of, for her to be aware of her symptoms and make sure she checks back in if things do start to worsen, right? All right, any other questions related to that case study, guys? All right. So I'm gonna minimize that. So remember too, there's another case study for chapter 8. You guys can take a look at it. If you go through that case study and you're not sure of one of the answers or something like that, just shoot me an email, right? Remember, I kind of decided that I didn't want to just blanketly post all of the answers to the case studies, because sometimes I'll use them for the exam and then they're just too easily accessible there. And so if you have a question though, just shoot me an email and I can always, send you back an answer, or just, if you wanted to just meet quickly about it to discuss it, that's fine too, okay? So if you went over it, you're not sure about something, let me know, okay? All right, guys. So we're gonna move on. So what I wanna do now is just pull up the review sheet and ask you, as you look at that review sheet, if there are certain things or certain topics that you want me to go over again right now, okay? So again, let's specifically focus on chapter 8 right now, and then we can move on from there, okay? So I'll pull up the review sheet, but you guys can take a look at that review sheet as well. So let me share my screen again, and let me pull up that review sheet. Ooh, it's blank. Okay, so remember in the beginning of chapter 8, right, we basically took some time during the last class, at the beginning of class, to define things, okay? So I'm anticipating there's probably not many questions with those sort of definitions. But if we take a look, a little bit further, why don't you guys, unmute and just let me know just throw out a topic that you want me to go over a little bit more, and I can do that, okay?
For all the other electrolyte imbalances, I think is there any ones you want us to focus, like I know sodium, potassium are important, but do you want us to focus on like chlorine and chlorine, like magnesium, like?
I mean, I think all of them are important in their own way. So this is here's one thing. Do not spend time memorizing the symptoms or the clinical manifestations. Have those tables handy for you during the exam, okay? But what I would say is that first slide, and I think I said this in the recorded lecture, when I'm talking about a sodium imbalance and then move to potassium, calcium, right, magnesium, that first slide, I think puts into perspective why that ion's important, right? And each one kind of has a little bit of sort of specifics that are related to it. Now, chloride, but still, they all kind of, they all have something that is sort of sets them apart from one another, I guess, kind of thing, okay? So I would say for each one, probably the most important slide or slides are the regulatory mechanisms, right? And we can go over some of those. Those are the figures that I basically pointed out on the review sheet and also really went over in the recorded lecture. But then also just that one kind of general slide that's first that kind of says, okay, why is sodium important, right? Or why is potassium important? That kind of thing, where it outlines just some basic functions. Does that help?
Going back to the diagrams, figure 8.5, the whole thing with the ADH, that's something that kind of confuses me, like the specifics of it.
Yep, we can go over that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anything, keep throwing stuff out there, guys. I'm writing it down and then I'll go over it all together.
So you were saying, I know in the lecture, you're saying, in the lecture last week, you're saying like, don't focus too much on the specifics of osmotic and hydrostatic and all those types of pressures, but understand like why they kind of happen. Could you just go over those again?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm probably not going to ask you much about those.
Oh, okay. Oh, then
So
never mind.
I will just kind of, I'll revisit it just briefly, but I don't want to that's why I didn't spend too much time on it, because it really takes a lot of time to understand. And then I think it takes away from the other things that we need to know. But yeah, I'll pull it back up. But again, I'll kind of tell you what, again, sort of just remind you what level you kind of need to know. But yeah, don't worry about that too much. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions, guys?
For causes of dehydration, we're just focusing on the two populations of infants and older adults. We don't really have to go into depth besides like the main cause.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious what the causes are. I think that the point is just to sort of remind us that older population and children and infants are more prone to dehydration, and kind of why. If you think about a normal adult, I mean, it's kind of you could probably come up with a whole bunch of causes on your own. But so yeah, so I guess the answer to that is yes, kind of just think about those special populations.
Thank you.
Yep. Other stuff you guys want me to go over?
Can we go over the figure 8.9?
Yep.
Thank you.
You got it. What else, guys? All right, well, let me start by addressing those questions, and then if others come up, just let me know, okay? Let me pull up the lecture. By the way, this figure here is figure 8.10. If you look on the review sheet, it says you don't have to worry about that figure, so don't worry about it, all right? Just so you know, it's not labeled as 8.10, but on the review sheet it says no, or I kind of, here, I'll show you guys what I'm talking about, because I actually modified it to make it more clear. Here, right? You don't need to focus on figure 8.10. I think before I had it written as no 8.10, and you're probably like, what the heck are you talking about? So it is that figure in the PowerPoint, this one here, that's on slide 37. It's not labeled as figure 8.10, but we basically go over that already. It's kind of just showing you the same thing in a different way. So I don't want you guys to be confused. The concept we've already gone over in another figure, okay? So don't worry about that one. That's not one of the ones I'll put on the exam. Okay. All right. So what were we going to go over first? Okay. Let me just kind of go in order from the lecture. Okay. This, who asked about that? Jackie, was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, and I try to kind of, it might be something that maybe I should just leave out of the lecture altogether, but I think it is an important concept, but I also think some of it's a little bit beyond the scope of our class. So I really just want you guys, what I want you to understand, I guess there are a couple of things, is that, I guess, what colloid or oncotic pressure is, and it's the idea that the presence of protein, right, in the plasma or protein in the blood will influence the way things move, okay? So the idea is that if you are, you have a severe nutritional deficiency or deficient in kind of, your protein levels are off, that's gonna affect the movement of, of nutrients out of the capillaries, right? And also the reabsorption of things back in terms of waste products, okay? So that's kind of one thing that I want you to understand. And so, again, what this is showing you is basically saying, at one end, the arterial end of that capillary, right, where you still have oxygen, you still have all those nutrients, because of the fact that the hydrostatic pressure in the capillary is greater because the hydrostatic pressure is greater than the osmotic pressure, right? All of those oxygen and glucose and all these other nutrients that your cells need, they'll leave, okay? They'll basically diffuse out and be transported out of the capillary, just basically due to the difference in those pressures. And again, one of those pressures is because of essentially is influenced by the amount of protein. The other type of pressure is influenced by, the amount of fluid and the electrolyte levels, okay? That's that hydrostatic pressure, all right? And the idea is that, again, when these are balanced, there's gonna be no net movement, but then on the other end, where you want things to come back into those arteries, okay, your hydrostatic pressure is less than the osmotic pressure, okay? So again, am I gonna ask you about on the arterial end versus the venous end, is hydrostatic pressure greater or osmotic pressure greater? No, okay? So in fact, maybe it's just best to kind of not worry about this. If it's confusing you, then just let it go, okay? Like I said, it's something that, maybe I could have kind of left out, but I think it's something important for us to just be aware of, okay? And the main thing really is that protein levels in the blood will affect the way things will move in and out of your blood vessels, okay? That's super important, kind of major, sort of main big concept. All right, does that help? Is that enough, or we need more?
No, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is go to figure 8.5, okay? And there it is. Okay, now, this is under kind of the topic of just regulating body fluids, okay? So, again, general, right? So we're kind of talking more general now, not specific to one of those specific ions, okay? So, and I think we kind of went over this, or we went over this term, right? Let me make this bigger, sorry. Okay, so if you guys look at the top here, at the top of this figure, right? It says blood osmolality. So what does blood osmolality mean, or what do we mean by osmolality?
The ratio of electrolytes to water.
Yeah, the ratio of electrolytes to water, the ratio of solute to water, right? Whatever you want to think of. And this is, again, in general, okay? So if you have an increase in blood osmolality, what does that mean? An increase means what? You have more electrolytes technically than you should, right? And if you have more electrolytes or more ions or more solute, then you have what? You have less water, right? Okay, so again, we're talking about, okay, what happens when you have or really this is just taking into account this one hormone, right? And what's this hormone here, ADH, stand for?
Antidiuretic hormone.
Antidiuretic hormone. We just talked about what a diuretic is, right? So if you just think about something, a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, what do you think antidiuretic hormone does sort of in general, and kind of if you look at the end result here?
Helps you retain water.
Yeah, helps you retain water, right? It's basically gonna cause, more water to be reabsorbed, right? Okay. So if you look here again on the left side here, increase in blood osmolality. Again, there's more solute, there's more electrolyte, there's more ions, whatever you want to think of, and there's less water, okay? So in that case, the body's going to detect that, right? And essentially that's going to be eventually sent, to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, remember, is your main regulatory region or main brain region that regulates the endocrine system, right? And it basically does that by sort of affecting the pituitary gland, okay? So the pituitary gland will secrete ADH, right? ADH will essentially work at the kidney, right? That's sort of that's its target organ, okay? And what will it do? It will basically lead to increased reabsorption of water, okay? And then also decrease urinary output. Obviously, if in the kidneys, right, in the kidney tubules, you're taking in more water, less water will be excreted out. Do we all agree? Okay, so more ADH around, right, will decrease the amount of urine output, will increase the amount of water that's reabsorbed, okay, into the blood. Now, on the flip side, if you talk about a decrease in blood osmolality, what does that mean now in terms of solute versus water levels? Somebody besides Kristen, tell me what that means. If we say decrease in blood osmolality.
Would that be that there's less electrolytes now and too much water?
Yes, very good, exactly, right? So now it's just showing you here ADH is suppressed. Now again, there's tons of other mechanisms that can that would be and can be activated here. Particularly, we're just focusing on ADH, okay? So this is just saying, all right, ADH is gonna be suppressed in that case, because why? You don't wanna be excreting more water out, right? Opposite, right? Here, you want to be getting rid of more water because you have more than you need, essentially, right? So in this case, again, there was less water, more solute. So the body can compensate for that by reabsorbing more water into the blood. If the flip side is true, in the kidney, you would want to basically keep more of that water in the tubules and then excrete that out in the form of urine. Okay, so it's the opposite. But what this is really, again, only taking into account the function of ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? And the way that it's correcting it is just by affecting water reabsorption. Do we all agree? We don't see anything in terms of, specific electrolyte levels or anything being affected here. Just water. Either it's increasing reabsorption or it's decreasing reabsorption. It's either increasing urinary output or it's decreasing urinary output. Okay? So again, think about diuretic. Think about what it means to be an antidiuretic. Okay? So we're only talking about water reabsorption here. More questions about that, guys? We're okay with that? Yeah? Okay. All right, let's. Okay, now, so like I said, I just want to kind of point this out again. This mechanism that we're talking about really was focusing on just, how can the body either increase the amount of urine that's being outputted or or decrease that, right? How does the body regulate how much water is reabsorbed at the kidney, or vice versa, okay? Now, the next slide talks about, and again, we're not really getting, this is all still kind of general, right? Regulating electrolytes. And the next mechanism that I talk about is this figure 8.9, okay? So again, remember that ADH and that mechanism that we just went through is really gonna just affect water and water reabsorption, okay? And now we'll talk about this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, okay? That's the next mechanism to talk about. And so remember too that the first part of this talks about just, somebody asked about this in the last class, so I just figure it's worth mentioning, I guess. In terms of when we're talking about isotonic fluid volume excess, this is just in general, right? In general, there's more fluid, okay, and more sodium, kind of, it's the same. So sodium's increased, but so is fluid. Does that make sense? Okay. The other flip side of it could, if you're talking about a decrease, it's sodium's decreased, but so are general fluid levels as well. Okay, so they're increased or decreased equally. Okay, but then everything else, we're talking specifically about that ion. Okay. All right. Now, this again is particularly now focused on sodium, right? Sodium imbalance. So what is one of the ways that the body essentially maintains those, maintains sodium levels, okay? And so one of the ways is this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, okay? Or RAS, right? So let's take a look at this. Now, this is, well, I'll ask you, how about that? What is this activated in response to? What activates this pathway that's shown on this slide here? Is it a change in blood osmolality that's activating this? What's activating this? Right? What's causing your body to essentially turn this on? What change? Where's my mouse?
A drop in blood pressure.
Thank you. A drop in blood pressure, right? This is going to be activated in response to blood pressure. So now I'll ask you again, because I asked you this before. How does blood pressure relate to fluid volume?
Excess fluid causes your blood pressure to go up along with your heart rate because it has to work harder.
Okay, and decreased fluid would cause a decrease in blood pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So, okay, so again, this is activated in response to low blood pressure, okay? So there's a couple things going on here. Again, nobody's gonna need to memorize this. If I ask you about this, I'm gonna show you this, right? And then find out if we really understand what's going on, okay? So it's showing you here at the top here that the liver, right, produces something called angiotensinogen, okay? This is essentially just like a peptide or a protein sort of precursor, okay? So it's there already. Now, if there is a drop in blood pressure, again, that's detected, it will cause a release of renin, okay, from the kidney. Sorry, I'm trying to get my cursor back. Renin from the kidney, okay? The angiotensinogen is already there, okay? So when the renin and the angiotensinogen come into contact with one another, angiotensin 1 is produced, okay? Oh my goodness, right here, right? Now again, something else that's around is this enzyme, okay? This enzyme causes angiotensin 1 to be converted into angiotensin 2, okay? Now, what are the effects of angiotensin 2 as shown in this figure here? What effects does angiotensin 2 have? There's two targets here. What's going on? What about this here? What is angiotensin 2 doing in this side here?
It's constricting the blood vessels, so it increases the pressure.
Correct. So it's causing a constriction in the blood vessels to increase blood pressure, because why was this activated? It was activated in response to low blood pressure, okay? All right, now what about on this side here? What's going on here? So now angiotensin 2 is also gonna have another effect, okay? And so here, it then stimulates the release of aldosterone, okay? This is a hormone from the adrenal cortex, right? From the adrenal glands. And aldosterone will lead to an increase in sodium reabsorption, which also leads to an increase in fluid, just in water reabsorption, which then will cause an increase in blood pressure, okay? So angiotensin 2 sort of has two jobs, right? Or two functions in this pathway. Okay, so aldosterone is involved in maintaining sodium levels, right? So an increase in aldosterone will lead to more sodium reabsorption. And like I said, that also then leads to more water reabsorption and will increase blood pressure. More questions about that, guys? All right. Okay, so obviously, figure 8.5, figure 8.9, these are important to understand. Make sure you can kind of, just like I talked through it, you can talk through that on your own, right? In your room by yourself, just like talk to yourself, right? Or you can talk to your friends and you guys can test each other out, but you should be able to explain that, right? If you can't explain that figure, what it's showing, then that means you don't really understand it, okay? So make sure you can explain it. Again, not memorize it, but understand it. Okay, so like I said, do not memorize the clinical manifestations of these, okay? Have these tables in terms of the signs and symptoms, not this figure 8.10, but this here, have it handy so you can just, you know, check on the exam, okay? You're gonna have your notes in front of you. That's something that's just a quick kind of check. Let me kind of check that, right? Do not, I mean, nobody's gonna memorize those anyway, but please, that's not what you should be studying, right? We should be studying these figures and understanding these concepts. These are here for you, okay? You can quickly check those out to you know, answer a question on the exam. All right. So this is what I was talking about in terms of this kind of first slide, right? Why are some of these, or why is each one of these ions particularly important? So if you're talking about chloride, sort of what's unique about chloride, well, it's a component of hydrochloric acid. None of these other ions are components of hydrochloric acid, right? Only chloride, okay? It's also important for carbon dioxide transport in red blood cells, okay? So those are the kind of things that I think we should know, okay? It is still also important in maintaining the osmolality of the extracellular fluid, okay? Because it's closely related to sodium levels. Probably you guys picked that up from the lecture. So in the extracellular fluid, I asked this to my other class too, what ion is predominantly present in the extracellular fluid? What positive ion?
Sodium?
Mm-hmm. Sodium. What about in the intracellular fluid, so inside the cells? Which one is it? Somebody else. What positive ion inside the cells has a really high concentration inside the cell? It's not sodium.
Potassium?
Yeah, potassium. Good. So something to think about, right? If you're thinking about kind of like extracellular fluid levels and things that are going to affect the extracellular fluid, they're probably going to involve sodium, okay? If you're talking about intracellularly, it's more, you know, potassium is going to be a little bit more important, I guess, okay? All right. The other thing is and I say this in the recorded lecture, for diagnosis, I'm not focusing on, a whole bunch of these different diagnostic criteria. I mean, it's the obvious, right? Like, obviously, if you have increased serum chloride levels, it indicates you have hyperchloremia, okay? So we should know what hyperchloremia means. But I'm not necessarily, again, sort of focusing, I guess, on the diagnosis and treatment. It's more about understanding concepts, okay? All right. I guess it is probably important to be familiar with causes of some of these too, right? So particularly kind of, that, I don't know if it's the last slide or whatever. Oh no, I guess I kind of set up the causes in the beginning. So that's something too to review. All right, so I want to just pull up again another figure. So here's one. This is one that I added in. This isn't from your textbook, just because I think on the previous slide, on the previous slide, for treatment, right, I mentioned calcitonin. And so maybe you forgot what you learned from AMP2, right? What's calcitonin? And so I guess calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are important in maintaining what? It says it, I mean, it gives you the answer right here, but what are they important in maintaining? Levels of what?
Blood calcium.
Yeah, blood calcium, right? So calcitonin, parathyroid hormone, those are both hormones. They are important in maintaining blood calcium levels, right? And again, remember, everything we're talking about in this chapter has to do with homeostasis, right? So if we say, all right, what happens if blood calcium levels are increased, right? That's going to then induce calcitonin to be released, okay? If calcium levels rise, calcitonin will be released. And what does calcitonin do? Anyone know? And I don't specifically, we focus more on parathyroid hormones, kind of more specific actions, but what does calcitonin do?
It decreases the amount of calcium in the blood.
Yeah, and what does it do with it? What do you think it does with it? It takes it out of the blood.
Does it put it in the bones?
Yeah. Yeah, so right, it takes it out of so this is the idea, right? You got more calcium in the blood than your body necessarily needs, right? For the function of your cells, say for neurons to function, for muscle cells to function. So that calcitonin will take that excess calcium and put it into your bones and store it in your bones, right? So that when calcium levels drop, now you have a store of calcium available, okay? So that brings us to parathyroid hormone. So what does parathyroid hormone do, right? So let's look at this picture here. So this figure is from your book, figure 8.12. We should be familiar with this. So what does parathyroid hormone do? There's kind of a couple things it's showing here, right? So this is a little more detailed. In terms of the bone, right? What is and calcium levels, right? What is parathyroid hormone going to do?
It's going to increase it?
It's going to lead to an increase in blood calcium levels. Yep. How does it do that, though? That's what this figure is showing you. So these osteoclasts are cells that will break down bone. And you might say, oh, well, that's not really good to break down bone, right? But on a small, to a small degree, it is, right? Because that's the way that calcium will be released and put into the bloodstream. Now, again, if this happens too much, what happens? What happens if your body's constantly breaking down bone so that you have enough calcium in your blood for your cells to function? What can it lead to?
Won't you get rickets?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and rickets has to do with, deficiency of, but yeah, anything along those lines. I mean, it's going to lead to bone fractures, right? Osteoporosis. These are, real problems. Obviously, you don't want to keep pulling calcium out of your bones, right? Because it's then going to decrease the strength of the bones, okay? But there is calcium stored there, and to a small degree, it's okay. But obviously, to a larger degree, not okay, right? So that's why I want to make sure you get enough calcium, right, in your diet. And again, that excess will be stored in the bones. The bones need that for their strength. Okay, so that's parathyroid's action on the bone, right? It will basically pull calcium and it'll pull actually phosphorus out of the bone and put it into the bloodstream, okay? Because your body needs it. What about parathyroid hormone and its effects on the intestine? Why is it showing you that there? There's a couple arrows there going on here. So you got kind of vitamin D feeding in here to the intestine here. So what do you think parathyroid's doing in the intestine?
So it looks like the parathyroid is inhibiting the kidney to guess filter out and obtain that nutrient vitamin D, and then it's going to be taken into the small intestine, and then the small intestine will then put it in the blood, I guess, or
well,
use
yeah.
it to...
So, okay, yeah. So there's a couple things going on right here. So let's go straight here. So parathyroid's action on the kidney, I guess we can kind of think of it as twofold. But one, it's just going to lead to increased calcium reabsorption, right, at the level of the kidney, because obviously you want to keep you want your body to reabsorb as much as it can, right? Because blood calcium levels are low. But also, vitamin D, right, is necessary for calcium to be absorbed from the small intestine. So now this is dietary calcium, right, that you're taking in. You would want your body to increase the absorption of that calcium, right? Because why? Your blood calcium levels are low. And so it's going to act kind of to sort of stimulate or activate vitamin D so that in the intestine you can take in as much calcium as the body can, I guess, right? Does that make sense? So it's sort of threefold going on. A lot of stuff that parathyroid hormone is sort of initiating here. Again, we're not memorizing that, we're just understanding that, okay? So kind of three main things. It's going to cause calcium to be released from the bone into the blood. It's going to cause an increase in calcium reabsorption at the kidney, and it's going to lead to an increase in absorption of calcium from the small intestine, from things that you're eating, okay? All which contribute to a rise in blood calcium levels. Make sense, guys? Let's see what else we have. Oh, I guess I skipped figure 811. So let's look at that one too. Does somebody have another question or more questions about what I just went over for the parathyroid hormone? No? Okay. Let me just look at figure 811. Where is that? Oh, did I not put that? Yes, I did. Wait a second. Oh, did I not put that on here? Wait, let me see what figure 811 is from my textbook, because I know I did. At least I think I did. Obviously, if it's not in your PowerPoint, you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, I wonder if I didn't put that in there. All right, now this is going to drive me nuts. I guess maybe I didn't. All right, I don't know. I must have. Let me just look. So this would be in potassium imbalances if it was in here, which is after chloride, right? All right, anywho, so don't worry about figure 8.11. The reason why I probably left it out is because it is also showing you aldosterone, right? And so it's showing you just aldosterone's actions on the kidney, and it's a sort of general picture. But what it shows you, and I think maybe, I don't even know if I should go there, but what it shows you is that aldosterone, if you remember, let's go back. So you guys don't think I'm crazy here. Okay, so see here aldosterone, right? We talked about its actions here that it increases sodium reabsorption. Well, aldosterone also will affect potassium levels. So it increases sodium reabsorption, but it actually causes the kidney to release more potassium, okay? So aldosterone affects both sodium and potassium levels. Here we are just focusing on its effect on sodium reabsorption because we're particularly looking at this pathway that then is activated by blood pressure. But sort of another effect of aldosterone is actually to affect potassium levels, but in the opposite way of sodium, okay? Don't worry about that. The figure's not there, but I wanted to make sure I clarified that in terms of what figure 8.11 was. It's on your review sheet, so I'll just cross it off on your review sheet, okay, guys? I guess we just cross off this whole bullet point. It's not in the PowerPoint, right, guys? Am I crazy? Nobody found it, right? It's not in the PowerPoint, right? Okay, all right. So just cross that off on your review sheet. I'm deleting it and I'll re-upload the new review sheet, but okay. So that, again, that was figure 8.11. You guys don't need to worry about it. I just cross that off, okay? All right. Other questions, guys? Remember that, you know, chapter 5, obesity, okay? And then chapter 6 is substance use, okay? So same thing with the substance use disorders, guys. Have the tables or the slide handy where it talks about the clinical manifestations, right? You're not going to memorize signs and symptoms, okay? I mean, there's some kind of major ones that you may associate with certain substances, but let's not spend the time memorizing signs and symptoms. That's silly, okay? So have those things handy so that it's a quick reference, okay? Spend your time understanding the concepts. Questions, guys, about anything from chapter 5 or 6?
So I might be overthinking this.
Yeah.
So Narcan is only for opioid overdoses, that like specifically opioids. So if I took like a hallucinogen, that wouldn't help me, right? Okay, just making sure.
Correct. Narcan is specific for opioids. It blocks those opioid receptors specifically, right, that other opioids bind to. So it's not correct. It's not going to do anything for any of the other substances, only specifically for opioids, right? Things like heroin. Other questions, guys? Chapter 5 or 6? If you want to just take a minute to kind of look over your notes. Ooh. No?
I have a question.
Sure.
For one of them, it talks about tolerance. I just included the basic definition, like from the book and PowerPoint. But do you want to go more in depth? Like there's different types, like immune, central, or like more relating to disease, just like a basic overview?
Just basic tolerance. I mean, I think tolerance is an issue with any substance, right? Or especially any of the substances that we talked about, right? Alcohol, right? Tobacco, and anything like that. So yeah, just understanding what we mean by tolerance in general. Yeah. All right, so I mean, I'll stay on. So if you guys have more questions, let me know. But remember, let's try to log on at 1:45 on Wednesday onto Zoom, make sure everything's working right. And then as soon as you guys are on, you know, you'll be able to just start the exam. Make sure you pay attention to the time limit, okay? It's there for a reason. All right, so like I said, I'll stay on. If you don't have any other questions, then you're free to go. But otherwise, I'm here. You want to ask some more questions about any of the chapters or anything, let me know.